This is money. Perhaps different types of currency from cultures across the globe. These pieces of paper fuel the fundamental running engine of humanity, the economy. One of the most transformative inventions in human history. Money is not merely a tool for trade, it is perhaps the reflection of civilization itself. Today, we're going to be talking about something interesting: the evolution of money, from the ancient agrarian communities to digitally interconnected economies. So, without further ado, let's begin. In the earliest period of human civilization, any commodity that was generally demanded and chosen by common consent was used as money. People traded goods like furs, salt, wheat, and even weapons. This system is known as the barter exchange. But there was a catch. Imagine you're a baker. You trade bread for everything. One day, you went to a shoe store and you wanted to buy a pair of shoes. You looked around and you find a beautiful pair. So you asked the shopkeeper, "How much bread should I pay for it?" The shopkeeper unfortunately told you that he doesn't need bread. He needs salt because he has a lot of bread, possible. But for you, it's a problem because you don't have salt. To fight this problem, you first have to find someone who is gonna trade salt or the bread, and then you return back with the salt to pay for the shoe. But why do you do the hard work? Is there any guarantee that the shoe that you saw would still be there? Despite having the ability to pay for it, you simply could not do it because of the currency. And this problem is known as the shared coincidence of wants. As civilization progressed, societies began shifting towards metallic money. Gold, silver, and copper became widely accepted because they were durable, portable, and their quantity could be verified. A gold coin could buy a finely tailored suit in the Roman Empire, and even today, a single ounce of gold can buy a fine suit. The value seems conserved. But this system had its own problem. Carrying large amounts of metal was not only inconvenient, but also dangerous. The ancient portrait of ships show why. Over time, merchants began depositing their gold with trusted institutions for safekeeping. In return, they received paper receipts, promises that the gold could be claimed later. And thus, paper currency was born. At first, every note represented a real amount of gold sitting somewhere in a vault. A system later evolved into what we know as the gold standard. And for a while, it worked. But then, the 20th century happened. Conflicts on a scale humanity had never seen. And war is quintessentially expensive. When the dust settled after World War II, the global economy was in ruins. So, in 1944, delegates met at a place called Bretton Woods to build a brand new system. To enforce and manage this new world order, two massive institutions were born: the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. Later on, a new world rule was established. Because Europe's vaults were drained and the United States held the vast majority of the world's gold, the US dollar was selected to be the only currency directly tied to gold, locked in at a fixed price of $35 per ounce. By cementing the US dollar at the dead center of the system, the rest of the world was automatically implied to rely on American monetary policy. It created a global dollar standard. However, in 1971, the US simply changed the rules again. Due to the Vietnam War and domestic programs, the United States was quietly printing dollars to fund them. That's why they started running short of actual gold reserves to compensate for the new money. Foreign nations started demanding the actual gold in exchange for their dollars, and to prevent a complete drain of the US gold reserves, President Nixon did something interesting. They closed the gold window and severed that $35 an ounce data forever. They trapped the rest of the world in a system backed by, well, all the currencies I'm holding right now. all the different currencies from across the globe, is fiat money. They don't have any intrinsic value anymore. They have value because the government says it does, and we collectively agree to believe in them. The intrinsic value is no longer there. And this brings us to the ultimate consequence: inflation. Inflation is basically the rate at which the general level of price for goods and services rises across an economy, reducing the purchasing power of money. In other words, same money, higher price. To understand the mechanics behind this math, we should look at the fundamental equation of quantity theory of money. In this equation, M is the total money supply. V is the velocity of money, meaning how fast the money circulates through the economy, which is also a consumer behavior. And P is the price level. And Y is the GDP or real output of an economy, the actual physical goods and services. This equation is very interesting because it's just a balancing act, basically. Y represents physical reality, which is output, and you cannot instantly manifest millions of tons of wheat, steel, or labor. It takes time. But M, on the other hand, the fiat money supply, is just paper and digital numbers. A central bank can increase M infinitely and instantly if it wants to. If a government drastically increases the money supply to fund its debts, like the United States did to fund the war against Vietnam, while the actual physical output of the economy and the velocity stays relatively constant, the equation must balance. And the only way to do it is if P goes up. Therefore, prices rise. So, inflation is not merely prices going up, it is the response of printing more fiat currency. Because fiat currency is no longer tied to any physical commodity, central banks can create more of it whenever they believe the economy needs stimulation. But when more money enters the system without a proportional increase in real goods and services, each individual money loses its purchasing power. It is the invisible tax of a system that abandoned physical limits in order to fund the modern world, infrastructure, technological revolutions, and this. We live in a world where the most powerful force dictates the nature of our economy. It is a complex equation that we somehow are forced to keep in balance, yet somehow imbalance keep on creeping and creeping. So that brings us to a question. What's the next thing we're going to agree on?